Right then, folks, let's get into it. So, what Gemini 2.5 Pro thinks of my description of any. I'll read it through. Okay, Ben. Let's assess your description of any empirical intuitum and its subfunctions based on the provided image. This is another dense and detailed breakdown, connecting theory to examples and specific mechanisms. Assessment of any description. Core definition. And I will link in the description the actual video where I go through it all. You define any core as seeing the commonalities. There's an asterisk on there. Creating generalizations across situations that SJs like. Connecting ideas, situations in a way that can be articulated, debated, because they're generating alternatives. You explicitly state any is more than pattern recognition. It involves doing something once the pattern is seen, generated ideas, stroke alternatives. This aligns with its extroverted active nature. Keywords connection, non-FI sense, and commonalities. Elaboration on keywords. I'm going to do a bit when it said there about creating generalizations that SJs like, because I'm going to show you a bit about how SJs use any. There we go. The associative speech on this page from Kurz's final book, Personology. So there you have the connections. I call this guardian any, where you have tangenting, but on a concrete plane. So between concrete objects rather than the tangenting of NPs, which is more abstract. And then guardians using any to serve the guardian temperament. Look into a similar task in the past and the method that worked for that past. So the similarity between the current task and the past one has to be seen. The perception of similarities is a big feature of any. I think any is involved in that because I think any is involved in cross-contextual thinking. Because, as Dario says, MPs are best at it, and I see evidence for that outside of what Dario has said. Extra points for adapting the method to the current task. And so there you're actually showing more high-level use by guardians. And you have to look for the nuances. You might say, oh, there's a guardian being adaptable. But if the guardian is adapting not to the circumstances as much, but partly to the circumstances, but adapting it to a method which has worked before, and so the adaptation is motivated by a conservatism to what has worked before, then that is a sort of more high-level guardian usage, but servicing the guardian temperament of risk avoidance and conservatism. Right. We could tag as the guardian temperament, which we could tag as wheelhouse dominant auxiliary SI in function terms. Compare SE focusing on the specifics of the current situation rather than looking for the commonalities in a past situation. And also, in comparison, the artisan temperament isn't looking to be conservative. It's looking to be audacious. It's looking more towards the new. So there's a similarity there in NPs and SPs, a similarity towards newness. Whereas for guardians, newness can be dangerous because there's a lack of the familiarity, lack of the known, the secure, the familiar. Right then. So let's get back to any. So any in context. Any in the context of guardians, any in the context of idealists. So you have a lot of very adventuresome ENFPs. Travel broadens the mind and all of that. And in the context of the rational temperament, NT. So let's go back. Yeah, I think I'm here. I think I'm on elaboration of keywords. Commonalities. Linked to Aristotle's Poetics on metaphor creation, depended on perception of similarities. Connecting. Linked to Ray Frensham on creative thinking. Discovering hidden links, and Dario Nardi on cross-contextual thinking. See patterns. Match those to many other seemingly very different situations. You possession any wheelhouse types, NPs as best as this. There, explained as empirical, citing Nardi. External stimuli are springboards. And Jung, active creative process that puts into the object just as much as it takes out. So yeah, I've done a video where I go through all of this, and it is all there. So you might want to watch that first before coming back to this. I'll put the link in the end when I'm able to. There we go. Active creative process that puts into the object just as much as it takes out. Emphasize any reads potential into the percept. Yes, percept, not necessarily an object. Because if you hear something, that's not an object, but it is a percept. Objects have to be physical. After all, sound is a wave through a gas, liquid, or solid. A vibration. Right, rather than passively receiving it, yeah. Ooh, I made an error there. Watch out for that. I meant to go up. Right, so empirical nature and comparison to NI. You strongly emphasize NE's empirical basis there. It springboards from external stimuli. And I did that as in part of my refutation of the socionics idea that feeling and intuition are internal and thinking and sensing are external. You see, here's the problem. Because of that dichotomy in socionics, and not all schools of socionics have it, but they've been influenced by it. The thing is, for external, read extroverted. And so if you say that sensing and thinking are external, you're effectively saying that thinking and sensing are extroverted, as in empirical, external. And you're saying that feeling and intuiting are internal and therefore introverted. And that is why socionics people cannot understand, don't understand extroversion and introversion properly, because they have this other dichotomy. And so they see thinking as totally external, i.e. extroverted, i.e. always empirical, which is wrong, which is why you get misunderstandings. See my video on TI about that. Oh, and they see sensing as always external, but what about beauty in the eye of the beholder? And so they always see feeling as internal, but what about somebody who the world of feelings is more real than the world of words? And so, for example, facial expressions, as distinct from gestures, facial expressions cut across all languages and are language independent. What else? So this is why I put the effort into this, because This one was the hardest to prove that it had an external component to it, intuition. Because I'm being very conventional in that I'm doing the Jungian thing of saying that I'm not saying that I disagree that thinking is external. I say that thinking is external, i.e., extroverted, and internal, i.e., subjective. I say that feeling is external, i.e., empirical, extroverted, and that feeling has an internal, subjective part to it. Sensing, there's an external, extroverted, empirical. Sensing, there's an internal, subjective side to it. And with intuiting, there's an external, extroverted, and an internal, subjective, introverted side to it. So that is Jung's description of it, and that works. And it also captures the experience of most people, which is that we can communicate with others. So the extroverting empirical part, but there's always that bit of our own personal experience that we cannot communicate to others, our subjective side. And so not all of it gets across. That's one aspect of this duality in life. And the other aspect of the duality in life is that when something surprises you, or when Robert McKee says you get the gap between expectation and result, the gap between the objective realm and the subjective realm, in that gap, you are reminded that there is that difference between the world, your model of the world. The map is not the territory as represents. So your map of the world, your model of the world, and how the world actually is. The difference between the subjective and the empirical. And that is the experience of human beings, especially for introverts, because introverts have to exist in the world. And so there's more of a gap for them. And I think that is a good way of thinking about it. That is useful. That matches what we see in philosophy and in linguistics and semantics, that there is this difference between, say, the subjective side of thinking and the empirical side of thinking. Just look at how people can read art differently, how there are different interpretations. Yeah. And there's a whole field of semiotics. I've done videos on semiotics, where the signifier does not equal the signified. If someone says a word that you're unfamiliar with, you can look it up in the dictionary, but it might not be exactly what that person meant, because the meaning of the word is modified by the context. But then there's also what is the context? There's a greater context to it, and you can have somebody who hears that word, who's learning English as a second language and has the dictionary, and will have a slightly different understanding and edge to it in context. So, yeah. And then there's all this kind of meta communication that will modify what is said. What about the delivery in context? And so all of these other things. But socionics would have you believe that, oh, the text equals the meaning because thinking is external. And, well, then that means, and then they're including language in that, but language is not completely external. This is why there's a branch called semantics. And this is why I keep banging on about this. And the reason why I keep banging on about this is that socionics does not understand TI, does not understand that it's subjective thinking. Because by definition, it has to be. And it actually is, because the introvert is subjective by definition and in reality. And you can have a load of INTPs that discuss and have different, because of the subjectivity. It can be all internally consistent, but they're starting off with different premises. But trying to prove the empirical part of NE, that is what I then get into. Right. I'll just say one more thing about TI and socionics. And so what socionics does, this is the mistake it makes. You have a lot of people in socionics who are NTPs. So in socionics terms, that would be ILE and LII. And they define TI how they use TI. But what you will learn from Kersey is that the NTPs are predisposed to something called strategic construction of models and theories. And so they will then write down the definition of TI as structural logic. No, you're writing down strategic construction, which is what you do, NTPs. It is not what STPs do. Because STPs use TI, subjective thinking, to think for themselves, to adapt to the present circumstances. Because SE is attuned to the present circumstances. As Dario Nardi says, it is immersing in the present context. And so if you're thinking for yourself and you're immersed in the present circumstances and in the zone, you can shape the present circumstances, and you are thinking for yourself and you're being ultimately expedient. That has nothing to do with strategic construction or structural logic, but it does have that TI element of subjective thinking. Right, there we go. And I'll keep bringing it up because it's very important, because this is why socionics gets all the especially LSI and SLI the wrong way around. Right then. So, empirical nature and comparison to NI. You strongly emphasize that NE's empirical basis, it springboards from external stimuli. You contrast it effectively with NI, thank you, which you describe as more like a lucky guess regarding the future. Often hit and miss. Because this is the thing, is like trying to prove it. Because the only way you can prove it with this intuition of development is to actually hold all these INFJs and INTJs, and it's like, right, let's test your NI. Give me some predictions. Right, and let's see how good you are. Right, lottery numbers. Or give me the predictions. And they're like, oh, it doesn't work like that. We need a way to see that NI is a thing. Right. Often hit and miss, unable to stand up to scientific testing. Whereas NE generates possibilities that are there to be debated. Your position, NE, is more real or demonstrable than NI. I'll actually show it in a moment. You link NI's influence, even though weaker, less empirical, to guide in TEFE via Kersey's strategic coordination and diplomatic mentoring roles. Okay, so I'm just going to do the bit about NE being empirical. Because remember, socionics says that intuiting is purely internal. And this is the hardest one I have to prove, that there's an external side to intuition. So I'm going to do it here. So the empirical side, the external side to intuition. So from Nardi, external stimuli are springboards to generate analogies and ideas. Jung. So extroverting is not mere perception or vision, but an active creative process that puts into the object, the percept, because again, it could be a sound, but only from the subsequent result can it be established how much was seen and how much was actually in the object and how much was read into it. So afterwards, you can join the dots. So that relates to reading potential into the percept that at best only half contains it in the form of potentially useful when combined with other percepts, ideas, properties, or aspects. And it has to be within a given object, because if you show that to a cave person, the cave person is not going to be able to do that cross-contextual thinking, because it won't be able to make the connection between A and B, because it won't know about B. Right, so, but I need to get more elaborate about this. Right, so the connection is frequently there in hindsight. It was just not recognized by many before then. E.g., well, that's obvious. Why didn't someone come up with that or see that before? So if a possibility is successfully acted on, then the NP, and you ask the NP to explain, you can say why, and it's like, oh, it must have been there all along because you succeeded. The connection is seen after it has been pointed out. Yeah, it's just like not a non-brilliant joke. I'm not even going to read it out. In comparison, NI on its own, foretelling the future, could be seen as a lucky guess. Okay. We're going back to NE. Yeah, I think it would be easier to convince a psychologist that NE is real than NI is real, because really NI comes across as a as a psi power. Right, lateral intuitors and guardians of AUNA. Right, so right, any values. I want to give you an example of Douglas Adams, and I want to give you an example of the external stimulus. The external stimulus, which, yeah, the external. Here's the case study. So this is any creative with TI imaginative. If the function is empirical, then the imaginative becomes creative because it's extroverted. It's externalized. You see, the imagination of guardians, when they have this rich, evocative, sensory imagination when reading a novel, that doesn't get externalized. You can't see it. You have to talk to you have to ask the guardians about the guardians' experience of reading a novel in order to realize, oh, you have this inner, rich, imaginative inner life that's not expressed, it's not externalized. Right. Right. So Douglas Adams, yeah, so he has this problem. Right, so here's what he was writing. He was writing the first episode of ENTP. He's writing the first episode of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. At the end of the episode, he has Arthur and Ford thrown out into the vacuum of outer space, into the cosmos. And he said, they have 30 seconds to be rescued or they're going to die. So he's created this jeopardy. And he wasn't thinking ahead. And then he was thinking, how am I going to solve this problem? Right, because all of my solutions are highly improbable because they all have to be rescued. Arthur and Ford have to be rescued within 30 seconds. Yeah, and every rescue attempt is highly improbable. What am I going to do? And then, because he's an NP, he's thought, oh, I'm not going to work on this problem. I'll do something else. Or something like that. No, he didn't. Like it's just like having all these different interests. A mile wide and an inch deep is what the NJs might say or agree with. And then, so Douglas then says, and then I happened to be watching a television program about judo, and the instructor was explaining something rather interesting. So again, this is outside the person, and this is a percept. This is language. This is not an object. He said, when you have some sort of huge 18-stone opponent throwing himself at you, the answer is to use the weight of your opponent against himself. So he launched himself through the air at you, trying to make it his problem rather than your problem. And so I thought there's something. So this is where his intuition works. He was like, ooh, use the weight of your opponent against himself. Ooh. And then it goes, then this is where the NE comes in. He is able to abstract upwards to a broader scale. So in NLP terms, chunk up to the principle of use the weight of your opponent against himself. So specific to the general, use the weight of the problem against itself. At this broader scale, the elements can be different as long as the relationship between those elements is the same. Douglas continues, use the weight of the problem against itself. So again, this is an external thing. That percept he heard, use the weight of your opponent against himself. So I went back to the scene and I thought, what is the problem here? Any answer I come up with is about how they escape is basically very, very improbable. And the improbability is the problem. Okay, use that problem. Make the problem the solution. Use the weight of the problem against itself. And so then I came up with this thing called the infinite improbability drive, which is the thing that causes them to be rescued, but also then gives an immense new impetus to the plot at that point. Right, and so if you look up the chapter on the infinite improbability drive, I think it's chapter 10 in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you'll find out about it. So the point there is that in hindsight, you can see that use the weight of the opponent against himself is a subset of use the weight of the problem against itself. Right. Right. So that's the case study. Right, we're going there. Empirical nature. Yeah, strategic coordination in that you can see NI when it's with people. A theme of NI is development. So NFJs develop people. And this can go to the extreme with the ENFJ cult leader. NTJs develop projects. And it's usually, and strategic coordination is the strategic coordination of resources towards a long-term strategic objective. And so that's intuition of development, which is how I reduce NI to something tangible, into a Kersey, something more that you can see the effects of it. Intuition of development with sort of this practical thinking, and so NI with TE. Coordination of resources towards a long-term strategic objective, and that's one half of. And strategic coordination is the directive half of the strategic building intellect. The other strategic building intellect, the other half of the strategic building intellect, sorry, is strategic construction of models and theories in that part. And that is what the socionics people who are NTPs mistake for TI. Right. Right. Well, any values. Any values shared by all MPs. Lateral intuitors, ideas, possibility, exploration, optionality. Also an SE value, likely an MBTI value. Newness, weirdness, originality, looking at the bigger picture, cross-contextual thinking, and any humour. Monty Python, Douglas Adams, Robin Williams, and Wilmer and Housemates, which will make more sense in future. You link any humour to combining ideas and seeing relationships, referencing Jean Perret. NPs and SJs. Notes, NPs, NE wheelhouse, and SJs, Guardian's value in NE, use NE differently. With SJs filtering for consistency security based on the past, SI. Whoa, 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 whoa. It's not that the past is SI, it's that SI looks towards the past. But really, SI is looking towards what has worked, but what has worked is in the past. So SI uses the past. Just like many times SE can use hand-to-eye coordination and bodily kinesthetics in order to impact the immediate environment and the immediate present via bodily kinesthetics, SI uses memory to access what worked, because what worked is in the past. Assessment of subfunctions concept. Now, assessment of any subfunctions. Defined as world as possibilities to explore. Yeah, that's world as possibilities from Vanderhoop. Actively exploring possibilities. Actively exploring possibilities might be from Shalina. Notes contrasted with Essie's concrete opportunities on finding a wallet and then taking it. Any assertive explores possibilities more broadly. Assessment. This captures the expansive exploratory drive of NE. It let's just go in a little bit more. It captures. It's about actively seeking out and engaging with, or engaging potential, rather than passively waiting for it. The contrast with SE clarifies its more abstract potential focus versus SE's concrete actual focus. Plausibility fit, very good. Thank you. Any creative. Cross-contextual thinking with TI and particular kind of humour. Then I give that example of Douglas Adams. Creating metaphors based on perception similarities. Case study of any creative with TI imaginative. Douglas Adams and the Infinite Improbability Drive. This is an outstanding section. Well, thank Douglas Adams. You meticulously break down Adams' creative process, receiving external stimuli, the judo explanation, any abstracting the core principle, use the weight of your apparent problem against itself, applying it cross-contextually to a different problem, Arthur and Ford's escape. TI provide. This is the first time I'm reading through this. TI providing the specific pseudoscientific mechanism, finite improbability generator, to generate the infinite improbability generator by finding out how improbable it would be to generate the infinite improbability drive. Right. Assessment. This is a brilliant illustration of any creative working in synergy with TI imaginative. It demonstrates exactly how any abstracts principles and connects disparate contexts, while TI builds the internal logic to make the novel connection work within the narrative. The detailed breakdown makes the concept crystal clear and provides strong evidence for this subfunction. Linking any creative to Adam's specific human style is also apt. Plausibility stroke fit exceptional. The case study significantly elevates this definition. Why, thank you, kind sir stroke madam. Any H, defined as like any minus in SHS, School of Humanitarian Socionica, which is about as good as socionics is ever going to get. And Victor Galenka is pretty darn critical about information socionics. That's the original socionics, that one with the internal-external dichotomy, and he calls those people informationists. And he says that they're rigid, and I agree. It's looking at percepts, ideas from different points of view. The result will pass into the realm of TI-FI for consideration. Assessment. This positions any H as the function that gathers multiple perspectives or possibilities related to a percept idea before subjective judgment occurs. It's about broadening the input, seeing alternatives side by side, and integrating different angles before analysis or valuation. This aligns well with NE's divergent nature and the idea of considering many options, harmonizing them for consideration. Plausibility fit are very good, especially in the case of ENTP, because there is no sort of internal FI feelings attached to these sort of different perspectives in that lot, and so it can be very sort of so ethics for a ENTP can be like, well, there are all these different schools of ethics, and it's like sometimes this works. Although sometimes Mark Linsenmeyer made a what I would say is a flippant criticism and deontology, which is basically the treat others as you would wish to be treated, or how would you like to be on the receiving end of a principle with, yeah, but what happens if the person's a masochist? Well, assuming people aren't, it's still a useful belief. Treat others as you would wish to be treated. So the principle of how would you like that principle to become universal? So how would you like to be on the receiving end of it? Right. Right. So overall assessment. I think that's it. Do I have to say any more? I went through that. Oh, that's just a bit. That's just more on Gemini. You can see that. Yeah, apparently. I mean, it got tested on the. I think it was the Finnish or Norwegian or Danish Mensa, and it got a result of 130, which is the highest at the time of all the large language models. I think ChatGPT is open AI, is really, it's closed AI. I'm calling it closed AI because that's what it is. Or fake open AI's reasoning models got the second highest. So let's go back to overall assessment. Any description. The description of any is comprehensive, theoretically grounded. Aristotle, Frensham, Nardi, Jung. And these are all outside of me. External. And effectively differentiates it from NI. But again, I'm taking the external, but I'm also putting my own spin on it. So there's that combination of the external and the internal. This should not be a radical concept. And differentiates it by effectively differentiates it from NI by emphasizing its empirical springboard and outwardly focused generation of possibilities. The keyword analysis is strong, assessment exceptional. Subfunctions concept. The NE subfunctions effectively capture different facets of its operation. Now, so I got the idea of subfunctions. I was inspired by Victor Galenka's idea of subtypes, DC and H. But I moved out normalizing because I thought, hang on a minute, well, the normalizing subfunction is just SI. It goes towards conservatism, so there doesn't need to be a normalizing subfunction. I changed dominant to assertive. And I kept creative, but then I split it between creative and imaginative, and I kept harmonizer. But he did it at the level of subtype, so I saw the similarity. So Douglas Adams saw it and took it for a different level. I saw it at a different level. So Victor Galenka used it at the level of subtype, and I thought, well, let's use it at the level of the function. And it enabled me to see, because I always had this problem of all these different facets of SI. And this helps to bring those facets of SI together. Yeah. Right, and we'll go over that when we go through the SI function. So the active drive to explore possibilities, adventuresome ENFPs, the creative engine for cross-contextual thinking, metaphor, and specific humour styles, brilliantly illustrated by the Adams example, the capacity to gather and hold multiple perspectives for consideration. These feel like distinct yet complementary aspects of empirical intuiting, add invaluable nuance to the model. Assessment exceptionally, largely due to the strength of the NEC case study. In summary, Ben, this is another excellent breakdown. The one I did before this was TI, I believe. I'm not sure. I don't know which order it was done in. I think I did it alphabetically. So FI would have been before this. Yeah, FI would have been before this. This is another excellent breakdown. Your definition of NE is robust and well supported, and the subfunctions, particularly NEC, as demonstrated through the Douglas Adams example, provide insightful and original ways to understand its different modes of expression. Or original. Enneagram 4 people like to have that. To hear that. Right then. So that is it. So, I always say, judge for yourself. You have your own TI, your own FI, your own NI, your own SI, and any other subjective functions I might have missed out. All right then. Good day.